Mark Few is repping the red, white, and blue for Team USA as the Olympic Games are now underway. How might his role with the team impact Gonzaga on the recruiting trail?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. In the dog days of summer, the sports are not sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, folks, it is Mailbag Monday today. There are plenty of ways to get involved in Mailbag Monday. If you are somebody who has not gotten involved in the past, you can join our Discord channel. That is the best way to do so. It is free to join. There's a link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. Click the link. Come hang out with us in the Discord channel. We're keeping up to date on Zag recruiting, women's basketball, Zag baseball. We're talking Olympics, all sorts of stuff going on the Discord channel. And it's a great place to get your mailbag questions into the show. Bunch of questions today. We'll also end the show with a recap talking about what we've seen in the Olympics so far. But speaking of the Olympics, this first question of the show comes from Salog16 on Discord, who says, do you anticipate a recruiting bump with Coach Few coaching with the Olympic team? Well, there's no way that it hurts. Let's put it that way. And I think there was some concern, especially with how last offseason went, that Mark Few being away from the team for extended periods of time could potentially be not good, I guess, for Gonzaga. And last year, while Mark Few was gone, he was working with the FIBA team getting in preparation for the Olympics. So obviously it wasn't actual Olympics last year, but he was still with the team, still with that coaching staff, still kind of working away from Spokane for a large chunk of the summer. And there's reports that was the timing lined up with when some of the players who departed the program before last season, like Hunter Salas and Dominic Harris and Efton Reed, that the timing of Mark Few being gone, some people have connected those two things as potentially being related. I don't know the validity of that. I have a hard time imagining that players would make a decision like that based solely on something like that. So there's other factors at play, but that was a concern that people talked about. However, this season, Mark Few got the entire offseason knocked out early. He got the players out of the transfer portal that he wanted early in Caleb Battle and Michael Ajayi. They get Emmanuel Innocente. They clean up the end of the roster with Ismaila Diane. They get some recruiting stuff done with Davis Fogel coming in. They got some other players that they're still obviously pursuing. And we've heard reports that assistant coaches are out watching guys like Nick Kaminia. They're out watching guys like Kingston Fleming, who we just heard about is coming to Gonzaga for craziness in the kennel. They're out checking out these players. So the offseason continues to spin and spin and spin. With regards to Mark Few's status as the lone college basketball coach on the sideline, first of all, incredible article just came out on Sunday as I'm recording this by Theo Lawson at the Spokesman Review with quotes from Eric Spoelstra and Steve Kerr and Tyronn Lue, as well as Jim Boeheim and PJ Carlesimo and a handful of other folks talking about Mark Few, talking about the opportunity to coach with Team USA, talking about what he's bringing to the team, what he's bringing to practices. It's a really good article. Highly recommend checking out. But one of the things that we've kind of seen is that Team USA likes to have one college coach just to give you a different perspective. FIBA rules are different than NBA rules, and having all four coaches coming from the NBA ranks just doesn't give you a lot of diversity, whereas Mark Few can provide something different. But there's only one spot for a coach. It's not a hard and fast rule, but typically they're only keeping one Division I college basketball coach. So to be the person who gets that honor, to be the person selected to do that, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And fundamentally, what it does is it brings more awareness to the Gonzaga basketball program. Can we pinpoint that it directly results in a player saying, well, I was thinking about going to so-and-so school, but now I'm going to Gonzaga because Mark Few's on the sideline? Probably not. but it raises the brand awareness. It brings validity to the program in ways that maybe people who aren't from the Pacific Northwest, when Gonzaga is recruiting in Texas or when they're recruiting in the East Coast or really even California, anywhere outside of like where Gonzaga is, if your program is more known nationally, it's a big deal. And it's a huge deal internationally, a huge deal internationally. Every game on the bracket or on the broadcast, and if you watch the game, Gonzaga, if you watch Team USA versus Serbia on Sunday morning, Dwayne Wade mentioned Gonzaga on the broadcast. He mentioned talking to Mark Few. He mentioned bringing up that Marquette beat Gonzaga back in, I guess would have been 2002 or 2003 when Dwayne Wade was at Marquette. He mentioned that. He mentioned how not a lot of people beat Gonzaga, so it's rare that I was able to get a victory against them. They mentioned Filip Petrusev being somebody who came from Gonzaga. So if you're watching this game, in this quick snippet, you hear a story that basically says Gonzaga doesn't lose in the last 25 years. And look, they have players on Team Canada. They have players on the Serbian roster, on the Japanese roster. Like that little snippet, if you're a high school student or a middle school student or the parent of a kid who's going to eventually play college basketball, that it's huge. It's huge that is out there, that is being broadcast to the world. Dwayne Wade talking about Mark Few is an objectively good thing. There's very little way where that is not a good thing for Gonzaga basketball. I don't know that you're going to hear recruits say, well, yeah, I chose Gonzaga because Mark Few is an assistant coach for Team USA. That's never going to be the specific reason, but it gets your foot in the door. It gets your footprint out there even more internationally and nationally than it already is. And it's hard to imagine that any of that is negative for Gonzaga and their recruiting. Next question here comes from Pete_22909 on Discord, who says, what are some of the reasons that a highly sought-after recruit would choose to come to Gonzaga rather than UCLA, Kansas, or other top-tier programs? Do you feel that playing the WCC and the Pacific time zone act as disincentives? How important is Gonzaga's record of getting players to the NBA? Okay, we'll tackle these things one by one. I think the first and fairly important thing to acknowledge here, the vast majority of players are not picking Gonzaga over UCLA or Kansas or other programs like that. I think that's a really important part of Gonzaga's story that needs to be emphasized and reemphasized. Gonzaga does not go out and just knock out five-star recruit after five-star recruit. They're not bringing in these huge classes. They're not bringing in tons of players who are picking them over other blue blood programs. That doesn't mean they're not getting some, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the reasoning here. But if you go to look at 24/7 Sports, kind of generally considered the most well-known, well-respected of the recruiting services right now, 3 players in Gonzaga basketball history were considered five-star talents when they committed to Gonzaga as high school recruits. 3. Chet Holmgren, Jalen Suggs, Hunter Salas. That's it. Some recruiting services considered Zach Collins a five-star talent, but there are 3, according to 24/7 Sports. Gonzaga's success is the domestic high school recruiting is low on the list of Gonzaga's success. International recruiting is higher. Player development is much higher. Transfer portal additions, or just transfers in general, going back to the pre-portal era, is higher than domestic United States recruiting. That doesn't mean that some of Gonzaga's very best players did not come from the United States as non-five-star recruits. Corey Kispert, Drew Timme, Adam Morrison. There are tons and tons of other examples in those situations. But I think that's an important part of this conversation, is that if players are choosing between Gonzaga and programs like UCLA or Kansas or Kentucky or Duke or whatever, most of those players are not picking Gonzaga. And that's fine. Gonzaga has succeeded in spite of that. However, to answer the question, all recruiting is different. I know that that's a kind of a lame answer, but it's an important caveat of, like, we can't just generalize why players pick Gonzaga over other programs, because every player does it for a different reason. The smaller school, the family atmosphere, the Spokane being a bit more of a remote area, that is enticing to certain players who might pick that over being in the glitzy Los Angeles area, being viewed as potentially being under more of a microscope at a place like UCLA that you might not be somewhere else. So I think that's the reason that you see Gonzaga's system is a huge selling point. If we're going to continue to use UCLA as a comparison, if I'm a up-tempo, like to facilitate offense, run motion offense, high octane offense, get out in transition, I'm absolutely playing for Mark Few over Mick Cronin. Absolutely. Now, Arizona's in the mix here, and Tommy runs a somewhat similar system. There are other programs, Sean Miller at Xavier, Scott Drew's system's not quite as run and gun, but there are other systems. UConn would if they're recruiting against UConn, they can probably sell them on that too. But Gonzaga has that advantage over a lot of other programs. And then the NBA success. The NBA success is huge. Gonzaga's tied for the 5th most players in the current NBA. The other programs that are ahead of them are like the bluest of blue bloods. I do think Michigan's on that list, but it's like Michigan, UCLA, Kentucky has a huge lead over everybody else. I think it's Kentucky, Duke, and then I believe it's UCLA, Michigan, and I think Gonzaga's tied with Arkansas, I believe is where the update is right now. So Gonzaga's ability to generate NBA talent from the transfer portal, develop NBA talent from the international ranks, develop NBA talent from 5-star recruits, and to develop NBA talent from not 5-star domestic recruits. And there's an example for every one of those. Transfers, you got Brandon Clark as an example. International, you got Domantas Sabonis as an example. 5-star, obviously, Chet and Jalen. And then non-5-star, Corey Kispert's an example there. There's more, but those are kind of the immediate obvious examples. So for why players pick Gonzaga, it's always going to vary. But yes, the NBA pipeline fits. The style of offense that they run fits. The small school family atmosphere fits. Does the WCC impact them? Sure. I'm sure there are plenty of players who have not picked Gonzaga because of the WCC. I don't know how many. Some of you would probably be horrified to find out how many it is. But that is the reality of the situation. Gonzaga continues to succeed despite not landing a significant amount of 5-star talent because the players who choose to come to Gonzaga know what they're getting into. They want to be a part of the system. They want to be a fit here. And Mark Few, if he's recruiting him, he's picky. He knows what he wants. So if he wants you and you want to be here, there's a very good chance it's going to work out. And by and large, that has been the case for Gonzaga throughout their history, recruiting and developing talent. Well, is there a reality where Gonzaga attempts to do a Notre Dame and go independent in basketball? We're going to break down what that might look like and how it might work coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, Ibotta. Are you taking that dream vacation this summer, but you're dreading the cost? With Ibotta, you can get cash back on every single one of your purchases, so you can spend more time making memories and less time dreaming about them. With Ibotta, you earn hundreds on items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover an entire shopping trip. That could cover a flight that you've been eyeing, or just a fancy dinner with your family that you've been craving. It's time you join the over 50 million users who choose Ibotta to earn cash back every single time they shop. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. So just go to the Apple Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's Ibotta, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store and using code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And folks, if you're looking for a second listen today, first of all, thanks for making this show your first listen. Always appreciate that. If you're looking for a second listen today, check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast. Myself, my co-host, Isaac Shade, also the host of Locked On Tar Heels. We don't hold that against him. The two of us did a show every day this week talking about transfer portal updates for every conference, all the Power 5 conferences, and then next week we will have the mid-major conferences as well. So if you're interested in who made the best additions in the transfer portal, biggest names that changed hands this offseason, check out those shows, Locked On College Basketball, wherever you find podcasts. Couple questions here before we get to some Olympic updates to close out the show. This question here comes from Christian via Gmail. Christian said, I heard this question addressed on Ion College Basketball and would love to hear your thoughts. What college basketball program would be most likely to be independent like Notre Dame football? The answer Matt Norlander gave was Gonzaga. Could this ever be a possibility? Is this more or less likely in the changing landscape of college basketball and sports? What other college basketball programs might do well as a rogue shark taking on the best competition in the open water that comes with no conference affiliation? So I didn't see this episode specifically of Ion College Basketball with Norlander and Gary Parrish, but if the question was presented to like which college basketball program makes the most sense to go independent like Notre Dame in football, Gonzaga is the answer. Like that is the school that would pop in my mind. That's the school that I would talk about. No power conference team is going to willingly choose to go independent in basketball. I know Notre Dame has done it for football. Obviously, that's part of how this question came about. It is much different in football and basketball. I think the obvious reasoning being the amount of games and the amount of games you play per week is much more difficult to try to schedule over a full season without a conference affiliation than it is in football. No power conference team is going to determine this is worth it. So you'd be talking about a mid-major team, likely a team that does not have football, because why would you keep your football affiliated with the conference and not your basketball? That would be strange to do. So if you're talking what program does this make sense to do at a non-football, non-power conference affiliated program, it's Gonzaga. Big East teams aren't going to leave the Big East to go play independently. That doesn't make sense. So you're talking like WCC, you're talking A10 potentially. So like Dayton, St. Louis, some of those programs maybe in the conversation. St. Mary's maybe in the conversation on the West Coast. But really, Gonzaga's head and shoulders above everybody else in terms of like their brand recognition and brand awareness, in terms of being able to actually schedule a routine, competitive schedule throughout the entire season. I think Gonzaga's the pick. Now, is this feasible? I don't think so. I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. First of all, let's assume we're just doing this for men's basketball. Maybe we assume men's and women's basketball too for Title IX purposes. It's not realistic for other sports. There's absolutely no way Gonzaga is going independent in every sport. So we're not even going to entertain that. So in this reality, you're taking Gonzaga's basketball programs away from the WCC while housing the rest of your sports still in the WCC. Is the WCC going to go for that? Probably not. If not, what do? Do you throw the rest of your programs in a different conference? That's a nightmare. That's a nightmare to try to handle logistically. But let's pretend all of that doesn't matter. Let's just get to the reality of Gonzaga's basketball programs are independent, or just for the sake of conversation, Gonzaga's men's basketball program is independent. How does that work? Well, let's look no further than Chicago State, who did this last year. And to be very clear, there is a huge difference between teams picking up a midseason game against Gonzaga versus a midseason game against Chicago State. That is an important caveat. I think it's obvious, but I want to make sure we clarify that. But Chicago State, they played basically 75% of their games before January last year. They didn't play a single regular season game past February 19th. They played 4 games in February. I think they played 5 or 6 games in January. 2 of them were back-to-back on January 2nd and January 3rd. Then all the rest of their games were in November, December. Played like 20-something games in December. It was insane, because that's when teams want to schedule non-conference games, is in December. They don't want to schedule non-conference games in the middle of the week in January, February, March. They don't want to do that. Teams would probably be more willing to do it against Gonzaga, but you still got to find 30-something teams that want to do this. I don't think it's feasible. I think Gonzaga could pull it off better than like Chicago State, because teams are more incentivized to play Gonzaga, but you're still going to have inconsistent games. You'd have like 1 week, you'd have like a Tuesday, Saturday, and then the next week you'd be like Wednesday, Friday. Like I don't see any reality where your schedule is in remotely consistently. And how many teams you're trying to schedule Power 5 teams? You're not trying to schedule a bunch of bad teams, because in that case, why the heck would you be doing this in the first place? So if you're trying to schedule Power 5 teams when they have gaps in their schedule, you're also having to try to convince at least half of them to come out to Spokane. No chance. No chance. Most of these teams will say, okay, yeah, you know what, we'd like to play you. We got, maybe the coaches out relationship. Maybe we want to boost our schedule in the middle of February, March, or January. We'll play on a Wednesday of this week because we got a gap. Sure. You want to come out to Spokane? No, they're not. They're going to say no. They say you got to come to us. So does Gonzaga want to play 70% of their games on the road on weird schedules where they play 2 1 week, 3 1 week, 1 the next week? No. Could they find a way to maybe make it fairly even with an even amount of home games and schedules that more or less aren't super chaotic? Maybe, but if they were able to do that, it's probably not going to be a litany of a bunch of super high-ranking programs. You're probably having to squeeze in a bunch of, buy game type contests, and in that situation, you'd rather just stay in the WCC. So the concept, super fun. The idea of trying to create a schedule for Gonzaga with this, where you get to play more fun games, more opponents that, instead of just playing the Pacifics and the Portlands of the world, sure, it'd be fun, but it's a much better idea than it is an actual plausibility. I just don't think it would work very well. And college basketball changing, the need to get out of the conference, all that stuff is still prevalent and still present, but I don't think independence is really the answer that makes sense for Gonzaga or for anybody really at this point. Next question here, final one of the segment, comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, if you could go back in time and experience in person any 2 of Gonzaga's most memorable or iconic moments, which 2 Gonzaga moments would you travel back to experience? Jeff also laid out a handful of kind of different options from like the old Gonzaga era, the rise to prominence, some women's basketball options as well. So I'm just going to be honest here. There's two options for me, and nothing is going to top them. I'll give a few kind of honorable mention options here, but the two that I picked, I think, are the two that the majority of people who weren't at said events would pick, which is the runner in 1999, the iconic shot to beat Florida, to send Gonzaga to the Elite Eight, what put them on the map in the first place. And then Jalen Suggs' game-winning shot against UCLA in 2021. Sends them to a national championship, keeps the undefeated season alive, a 37-foot bank shot at the buzzer to beat a West Coast rival in a game to send you to the championship. It doesn't get better than that. It doesn't get better than that. And there are great alternate options. The Jordan Matthews shot to beat West Virginia in the 2017 run up to the national championship, that South Carolina game that Gonzaga won to send them to their first national championship game. You could even argue you'd pick the championship game just because it was Gonzaga's first time being there, although it would be a painful game to be at. There's plenty of other ones. Julian Strother's shot over UCLA in 2023 is a good one. The Adam Morrison bank shot over Oklahoma State. On the women's side, Jill Townsend's game winner over BYU in the WCC title game in 2021. That's the top choice there for me because that was an incredibly emotional game. There was injuries for Gonzaga. It really felt like they were going to lose, and they come back and win this super emotional game against a rival on a game winner. It was an insane game there. So that's the pick on the women's side for me. But on the men's side, it's definitely the runner in 99 and Suggs' big-time game-winning shot in 2021. All right, folks, closing out the show, casting a movie about the rise of Gonzaga basketball and some updates on the first Olympic Games on the men's side. All that coming up in just a second. But first, let's talk about today's sponsor, FanDuel. I love sports. You love sports. We all love sports so much that we never want them to stop. But it's the dog days of summer, and sure, we got the Olympics, but we got fewer games in general. The sports, they're just not sportsing like we want them to. However, FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Folks, if you're listening to this on Monday, on Tuesday morning, bright and early, Team Canada takes on Australia. You got a pair of Zags and Kelly Olynyk and Andrew Nembhard. They're 6.5-point favorites over a trio of Gales on that St. Mary's roster. Jock Landale was awesome for them in their first game. Patty Mills had a great game. Matthew Dellavedova, not so much. Regardless, if you want to watch that game, you want to have a vested interest, you want to watch Gonzaga beat St. Mary's, even if they're going to call it Canada over Australia, then what are you waiting for? Head to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, segment 3, we got one more question here, and then we're going to close out the show with some updates on the first few games we've seen of the Olympics and how our former Zags did. Last question here comes from Christian via Gmail. Christian says, in The Slipper Still Fits, the movie, who plays some of Gonzaga's cast of characters? He gives some ideas as well. He says Kevin Bacon for Mark Few, Michael Keaton for Dan Munson, Owen Wilson for Adam Morrison, and Ryan Reynolds for Tommy Lloyd. I like a lot of these. Not sure I fully get Ryan Reynolds as Tommy Lloyd as much as I enjoy watching Ryan Reynolds, but I definitely love Kevin Bacon for Mark Few. It feels like that's just, if there ever is a movie about Gonzaga that's not a documentary that actually is like has actors playing the characters, that's just such a slam dunk. It would kind of have to be a modern movie because I'm guessing Kevin Bacon and Mark Few are pretty close in age currently. So if you're making a movie that comes out 5 years from now or 10 years from now that's about 1999. Kevin Bacon's not exactly going to look like Mark Few anymore, but certainly a more modern movie. Absolutely. That's an absolute slam dunk one there. I will offer a couple alternatives and some other players as well. If we're making a movie now, I'd cast Andrew Garfield as Adam Morrison. First of all, I think Andrew Garfield's a talented actor. I think he's funny. I think he could play the Adam Morrison type role very well. Certainly you'd have to change his look a little bit, throw a mustache on him, but I think that absolutely works. I think that'd be a fun one for me. And give me Jesse Plemons playing Tommy Lloyd. I know it seems odd at first, but I think you could definitely make it work. I think their face is somewhat similar. You obviously have to dye Jesse's hair. For those of you who don't know, he was on Friday Night Lights, on Breaking Bad, been on a handful of other things recently as well. Very talented actor, one of my favorites, which is why I'd pick him here. But Kevin Bacon and Jesse Plemons being coach and assistant coach, helping Gonzaga's basketball rise. I just think that'd be a fun movie, and I would enjoy watching it. A couple other ones. I actually just one more here. This is as easy as it gets for me. Little Dicky as Kelly Olynyk. It's easy. We've already seen Lil Dicky wearing a Kelly Olynyk Gonzaga jersey. I think it was in one of his music videos, or at least he's worn it on some kind of social media. The show Dave is hilarious. If you haven't watched it on Hulu, that's Lil Dicky's TV show. It's fantastic, super funny. And I just feel like he's a basketball guy. He can play. He'd look like a basketball player on a screen. So sign me up. Lil Dicky as Kelly Olynyk. I think that's a perfect addition to this cast. All right, we're going to close out the show with an Olympic update. We have now seen every men's basketball Zag in action. We have yet to see the women's side and Yvonne Ejim, and we haven't seen the 3-on-3 stuff start yet, but we'll get some updates on that as they get underway. But wanted to give an update on where the men's basketball Gonzaga alumni are at after their first game in the Olympics. Team USA on Sunday morning took down Serbia 110-84, which, folks, if you watched this game, that score is not super indicative. It was a closer game throughout the majority of the first half, and even pretty well into the third quarter. The game was decently close. I saw a stat, I'm paraphrasing it, but Serbia and the U.S. were even in the minutes that Nikola Jokic played. Even. And then Team USA was plus 26 in the 9 minutes. 9 minutes that Jokic sat in that game, they were plus 26, but when he was on the floor, they were even. I don't know if there's a stronger argument for Jokic as the MVP type player. That is a incredible testament to it right there. What a stat. Regardless, we're talking Zags players. Filip Petrusev, 4 points, 5 boards, 2 assists, and a steal. He played 21 minutes in this game. He was 2 of 2 from the field, hit a little mid-range jumper over LeBron James. Dwayne Wade, who was on the broadcast, kind of said, oh, LeBron dared him to shoot, and he just shot it right over him and made it. And like, yep, that's reasonably, I think if you're Team USA, you're letting Filip Petrusev take 17-footers, and he knocked it down. Good for him. He also got in a little bit of a scuffle with LeBron. There's a lot of physicality in the FIBA events, and it was called maybe a little bit unevenly. Some people didn't like the officiating. There's always going to be people who don't like the officiating, but there was a scuffle. Petrusev kind of had his arm around LeBron. It probably should have been a foul on him. LeBron, though, pushed Petrusev straight to the ground. It's funny to watch the best basketball player on planet Earth getting into tussles with Filip Petrusev. I don't know exactly why. It's just a unique thing to see. Petrusev, I think you have to say, struggled on defense because he was assigned to guard LeBron James and Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant did not miss a shot in the first half of this game. I think he only missed 1 shot all game. A lot of them were just ridiculous shots, hitting fadeaways, hitting mid-range with Petrusev right in his face. Like, I don't know that he could have done a whole lot more. It doesn't look great for him, unfortunately, but Filip Petrusev is now on a very long line of players who struggled to defend LeBron James and Kevin Durant. No shame in being on that list at all. Looking at the other games, Team Canada played Greece on Saturday. They won that one 86-79 for the Canadians over Giannis Antetokounmpo and that Greece team. Neither Kelly or Andrew had particularly good games, unfortunately. Not a great start for them individually. I'm sure they're both quite happy that their team got a win. They played great defense, the whole team did, but Kelly had 4 points and 6 boards. He shot 1 of 6 from the field. He had 3 fouls in 13 minutes. Meanwhile, Nembhard had just 2 points, nice little mid-range jump shot. He had a board assist, 1 of 1 from the field. It was only shot attempt in the game. He also had 4 turnovers in just 14 minutes of play. I suspect we'll see better performances from both of them as the Olympics roll on, but not a great start for them. But hey, Team Canada's 1-0, so that's what really matters for them. Team Japan, however, is 0-1. They took a 20-point loss to Germany, 97-77. We didn't expect the Japanese team to be particularly competitive. They're not a team that's going to medal. It would be a very big shock if they did in this situation. Rui is pretty clearly their best player, and teams key in on him. And it's unfortunate because it means he might have more stat lines kind of like this one. 20 points, 10 rebounds. You look at that and you're like, that's great. 20-10 double-double. That's what you want to get from your best player. He also had 2 assists and 2 blocks. However, he was 4 of 19 from the field in this game. I'll repeat that. 4 of 19, 2 of 9 from 3. He was 10 of 12 from the free throw line. That's where he got the majority of his production. But yeah, this Japanese roster is just not good enough. Even when Rui's playing fantastic, he's just got the defense is all keyed in on him. It's an unfortunate situation. I think he probably knew this is what it was going to look like for him. Hopefully they can steal a victory or 2 at some point. But yeah, it's going to probably be a rough go for the Japanese team. And then schedule-wise, by the time you're listening to this, there's a pretty good chance that the game between the Canada women's team and France has gotten underway or is perhaps already over. I think it starts at like 4 or 5 a.m. On the West Coast, at least on Monday morning. Yvonne Ejim probably won't play much. Maybe we'll see her in towards the end of the game. She hasn't been playing much in the exhibition series. Most of the college-age players on various Olympic teams are not playing all that many minutes. For Yvonne, wasn't really the expectation that she would, but will be great to see if she does get some minutes against France or perhaps later in the Olympics. Very excited to see if she can get some opportunities, get some points, do something more than just be somebody who's really excited on the sidelines, although she's been fantastic at that so far. But definitely keep an eye on that, and we'll, of course, keep you up to date as we go through the rest of the week, as we get more games, as the 3-on-3 tournament gets started, and we see Sunny Greinacher and Casey Bosch, who both played at Gonzaga on the women's side, representing Germany and Canada, respectively. All that coming up later this week. But, folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on Locked On Zags. We got more fun stuff coming your way this week. We're going to talk NBA draft for 2025. We're going to look at every player on Gonzaga's roster, how likely they are to be selected in the NBA draft in the future. We're going to take a look at just getting ready for the season. We got some guests lined up for this week as well. More Olympic coverage, all that recruiting, all that good stuff coming up this week on Locked On Zags. So definitely stick with us. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Until next time, as always, go Zags.